Did you know there is a weird bug in Procreate that is so serious, one of you have called it a fatal flaw? Now, before you call me out for milking this tips topic, you only have yourselves to blame as all of these are from you. That's right, these tips are based on comments you've left on my videos, and I should actually thank you guys for teaching me about Procreate. So stick around to see if you've been featured in this video or just to learn something new. This video is sponsored by Torres, the original iPad stand case maker with built-in dual kickstands. More on them later. What's the most efficient way to switch between the brush up here and the eraser here? So let's say, for example, I'm drawing something. Let's draw this face. Normally I'd have to jump up here, hit my eraser, make my changes, then jump back up to the brush again and continue. That's a lot of jumping and it's kind of inefficient. So in the past, I thought I was really smart by going up here into my wrench icon, going to preferences, gesture controls, and turning this on, which means when the square modifier button is held, my Apple Pencil will always erase. So I thought this was a pretty neat shortcut. So for example, I am drawing here, and then if I hold down this button now, it will automatically erase. And then if I let go of it, I'm back to my brush. But you know what? Using two hands is just way too much effort. I really just want to let my right hand here rest and be comfortable. Thankfully, Fathancia left a comment saying I can actually double tap my Apple Pen to change between the brush and the eraser. Now, at first I was confused because when I do this, I don't see anything changing here. And it wasn't until I Googled it, I found out I actually have to go out of Procreate and then go into my iOS settings and go here to Apple Pencil. And then if you look up here under actions, you can see double tap. So if I click on double tap, now you've got these options, and one of the options is to switch between the current tool and eraser. So if I hit that and then jump back into Procreate, now if I double tap, you can see it change to the eraser. So watch these active tools here. Every time I double tap, it changes. That's pretty sweet. So I can erase and then I can double tap and I can do that. And that means my right hand here can be a lazy ass and just sit here and relax. Speaking of iOS settings, if you've ever seen this menu here and you can't get rid of it, you're in luck. JRC says, I have this menu on the left bottom side of the canvas, redo, undo, move, zoom, fit on canvas, and I don't know how to close it. Can you help? Well, it turns out this menu is an accessibility menu, and the only way to turn it off is to go out of Procreate, back into your settings, scroll down to the Procreate app, which we should be able to find right here. And then if you scroll down, you'll see this item here, single touch gestures companion. So just toggle that off. And if we go back into Procreate, you can see it's now gone. Okay, what's the most complicated gesture you've seen in Procreate? For me personally, when I saw the 4-finger touch, I thought that was pretty intense. So you can see when I touch with 4 fingers, it toggles full screen mode. So I just came out of it and you can see the UI here. But if I tap with 4 fingers, it disappears again and I'm in complete full screen mode. But recently I discovered a gesture or series of gestures that are so complicated, I wouldn't even call this a gesture anymore. I like to call this Procreate Kung Fu because you need 2 hands and a number of steps to pull it off. So are you ready? You'll encounter this issue if you need to move a bunch of layers from one file to another. So for example, let me choose these 3 layers, the window, and I'm going to move these to a new file. And tap and hold on them and move them up here to the gallery. Now here is my target file that I want to move them into, and you might think you need to just move it on top of it like that. But you can see the mistake here. Procreate has made a file for each individual layer, and we don't want that. So let's delete those. So let's try this again. Pick up our layers as we did before, drag them over to the gallery. And while the gallery is open and while you're holding down with this finger, use your other finger or pen to tap on the target file you want to open. Now you might think just drop the layers right here, but no, you still need to do one more step. Now we've got to go to the layers panel and then drag the layers into the panel like this. You can see also that these layers have lost their clipping masks, so I'm going to have to add those back on. Voila, your layers have been moved. The next tip is probably one of the most useful tips, but before that, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, the Torres Ostan iPad case, which is right here on my iPad. The great thing about this case is it's got dual kickstands, so I can use this small kickstand for drawing, but it also has this bigger stand that is great for other tasks, like working out. Or I can even stand it in portrait orientation when I want to read books or even refer to a recipe in the kitchen. What really impressed me about this case is how good the build quality is. The hinge is super sturdy, tested over 30,000 times, It's made of an aerospace grade aluminum alloy that doesn't feel cheap like other kickstands. It has a 360-degree airbag design, meaning it fully wraps around the iPad, including a slight lip on the screen side, so your iPad is cushioned and won't touch a surface face down. It's a coverless design, but that means it's more convenient, no complicated folding, and more minimal, less distractions allowing you to focus. Plus it has a slot for your Apple Pencil that allows it to continue to charge, so you don't have to worry about it slipping off or losing battery. The Taurus Ostan iPad case gives me a real sense of security, striking the perfect balance of being slim and offering protection. Seriously guys, if you're in the market for an iPad case, check out the Amazon link in the description. I wouldn't recommend this product unless I personally use it and think it makes sense for you. And by supporting the sponsor, you also help support this channel, so I really can't thank you enough. Alright guys, let's get back into it. Tip number 4 is from a huge juicy comment, so let's dig in. Shadow Chasers 1 says, you basically take your flat scanned image, black and white line art on a white background and add a layer filled with black above it. Put a mask on the black layer, copy the scanned image layer and then select the mask with the color black, paste the 3-finger swipe, blah 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 blah. Okay, so that's a lot of text. Let me demonstrate what they're saying so we can actually understand this. Okay, so let's go up here to the layers and you can see I've got my old line art that is completely flat right here. So first we need to create a new layer above it and fill it with black. Then we're going to turn it into a mask by tapping on the layer and then hitting mask. Now we're going to copy our original line art by tapping that layer, hitting copy, and then tapping on our layer mask again, and then swiping down with 3 fingers to paste the line art into the mask. So just so you understand what we did, we took that layer and we pasted it into the mask. You can see that there. Select the mask and then hit invert here. Finally, select the black layer and then hit merge mask in the menu, and this makes our mask effect permanent. So now we have our line work on a transparent layer. It's weird because it doesn't actually show it with the checkered transparency like these layers, but let's just test that it actually is transparent. So I'm going to create a new layer above it. I'm going to drag this red onto the canvas and you can see how it's actually showing through. I can also test this by, let's fill it with a gray, and then I'm going to actually try coloring in the lines. So I'm going to turn this into an alpha lock and let me just do this and see, there you go. Like I'm actually coloring onto my now transparent line work. So the really great thing about this is if I turn off these layers beneath, and now if I want to color in this line work, I can. And say for example, there's a bit of green here, I can actually color my line work to be green and kind of take the heat off of how strong those black inks are. And see, it already looks more realistic that way. And a lot of comic book artists do this. It just really adds a lot more pop and realism and more subtlety to your artwork, and just really helps blend that line work away into the painting. These next 3 tips are more like problems or quirks, and the third is a weird bug that I'm a little shocked Procreate has left unfixed. NettyPie says, is there a way to create gradients, particularly for objects? I just thought you might have a tip or trick that would help. So believe it or not, Procreate can't do gradients. Yep, that basic feature from every imaging program since the 80s or 90s. Normally you could just select 2 swatches and drag a gradient, but as far as I know, Procreate can't do it. You need to do it the manual way, just airbrushing it and blending it. The way I would do it is just to make sure you have your active color selected, go to your brushes, select the airbrushing, the soft brush, put it to a pretty large size, and then just start placing it down like that. Then select your second color that you want to airbrush to and put that down above and just slowly work it in. Owen says, I hope for an update that brings features from Procreate Dreams to Procreate. As long as Procreate crops the content of a layer as soon as I move the image outside the border, I will not use the software. So just to explain what Owen means, let me just grab our circle window again because it's a pretty good example. I'm going to group these and then just duplicate it because I don't want to ruin it. And I'm just going to flatten this. So now I've got my circle on a flat layer like this. And what Owen is talking about is if you move this circle off the canvas like that, Procreate is not going to remember that you still have a complete circle there. It's actually just going to chop it according to the borders of the canvas. So if I do that, and now later on, if I try to pick it up again, boom, I've lost my circle. And this is a pretty big deal, especially if you've come from other programs where they have things like artboards and the program has memory that remembers your shapes sitting off the artboard. And then when you bring it back onto the artboard, it's still intact, but not with Procreate. You can lose your entire thing this way. You know, if I do this, I've effectively lost my thing. See, so there's that layer that had my circle and it's completely gone. Tyrion1 says, I've been using Procreate for my digital art for multiple years now, and the reference feature has a pretty fatal flaw if you're planning to use it for color selection. It will desaturate every color you pick on all color profiles. Yes, I use RGB. I found this is obvious on super saturated colors. I mostly use a reference layer for character reference sheets, and not being able to rely on the colors I select from the reference window really lowers its value to me. Okay, so I couldn't believe this one was real, so I had to try it out. Now, at first I tried using a reference window of my existing canvas and all seemed fine. So let's go up here to the wrench icon and I can go to canvas, and here is reference. So let's select that, and you can see I've got a reference of my current painting. Now let me select a brush to paint with. I'm going to go with my flat vertical brush, and let's pick a color from here. So let's pick this color, and if I paint it down on here, that seems pretty accurate, like there's no problem there. But after a bit of testing, I realized the real bug happens when you import an image into the reference window. So let's change this instead. So let's go to image and import. Okay, and I prepared this pure green JPEG that I'm going to import. Now let's select the green and start painting with it. And I don't know, does that look like a different color? It does. So let me put a layer down underneath. It's a bit more neutral so we're not so distracted. Let me make it black. It does look different. Wow. You know what? Let me try it with a super saturated color because that's not really a fair test. Let's go with this super bright green. Go over that. Maybe this is too bright. Okay, let's do this color. Now I'm going to share JPEG, save image. Okay, now let me remove this, and we're going to go back to our reference window and import that new really bright green. Okay, we got that. Now here's the moment of truth. Let's select this green color. Hello, yep, select this green color and let's paint it down. Wow. Let me try it with a different brush. Let's try a brush that we know for sure is like fully opaque. I'm going to go with the inking brush. Let's go with the Studio Pen. Yep. And yeah, there you go. We are on 100% opacity and it's still a different color. It's a slightly different shade. By the way, shameless plug here, but the brush I'm using here is from my Essentials brush pack. It's great for smooth blending and a painterly texture, and it's available on my website, jaywalkerpictures.com. All purchases allow me to continue making art and videos, and I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Okay, this one is embarrassing. And before you say anything, yes, I know it's ridiculous to be obsessing over something as simple as copy and paste, but Procreate has so many ways that you can copy and paste that you can easily learn an inefficient method and be stuck using it for years before discovering a better way, which is what happened to me. So in a previous video, I was pretty chuffed that I managed to get my copy paste workflow down from 7 steps to 4 steps. And you might be thinking like 7 steps, that's crazy. But yeah, I was doing it the slow way. So I would go up here to the wrench icon, and then I would go to add, then I would go to copy, and then I would do this really dumb thing where I would go to my layer because I thought I would need to create a target layer to paste into. Then I would go back to the wrench icon and hit paste. And anyway, I thought I was really smart getting it down to 4 steps. So this is what I would do. Swipe down, hit copy, swipe down again, hit paste. But you guys had plenty of suggestions on how to get it down even further. For example, Naful the Garthok says, you can also swipe your layer to the left and select duplicate. That's 3 steps because I need to hit my layers panel, swipe left on my layer, then hit duplicate. But again, I was proven to be the dummy because Rachel says, copy/paste, is that not just the same as duplicating a layer, which takes 2 actions? Now, at first I was confused because I thought that was 3 steps like I just showed you. But if I go back to my canvas and I just swipe down with 3 fingers, look what we have here. duplicate. Boom, 2 steps. 1, 2. This is the definitive, fastest way to copy and paste. Case closed. Recolor is a really cool feature which you probably know better as just being the fill tool or color drop. So if I grab this active color and drag it onto my snow cap here, I can fill it like this. And if I keep the pen held down, I can adjust the threshold and increase it or decrease it. And you can see it bleeding out to other colors. So you're kind of replacing the color that you're targeting here with my pen. So once I take my pen off and then I go to another tool or I go to my brushes, and I can continue doing my artwork. But what if I want to continue filling other parts of the artwork? According to Orafuda, I can continue recoloring by selecting the continue filling button. So let me undo that. Let me fill here. So put my color down, let me adjust the threshold, something like that. And if you look up the top, you'll see a button that says continue filling. Okay, so now that I've hit that button, I can go and drop in other areas. So here we go. I can drop again, and also if I hold down, I can adjust the threshold. I can choose here, oops, undo that. And the cool thing is, even when I undo that, I'm still in this continue filling color drop mode. I can also go here and change the active color. So let's say I decide that color isn't quite right and I want to choose this cyan. Now I can just go and color drop, for example, here. And I can just keep going. Like, I'm just always in this mode. Until I go and select another tool or I hit this tick button. That's a super time-saving feature, and it means I don't have to keep reinitiating that recolor or that color drop. Okay guys, so we've made it to number 10, and this is the feature I explained in a past video that you guys felt was a complete game changer. But I got one thing wrong about it, so let me explain, and trust me, if you can understand this, I'd say you're getting close to Procreate Master status. If we go up here to the wrench icon and then go to the Preferences menu, you'll see a setting here called Dynamic Brush Scaling, and it's on by default. When I have it turned on, our brush acts exactly like you would expect. So let me get a brush. I'm going to go to the airbrushing section and just choose our hard brush. And I'm going to set it to, let's say, 10%. And so if I draw a line like this, it looks like that. If I zoom in and draw a line, it still looks like that. It's exactly the same size. And that's what you would expect, right? Like if you imagine it in real life, like just because I walk closer to my canvas and paint a brush stroke, it doesn't mean my brush size changes, right? I'm still always holding the same brush. So now zooming out, the brush size is still the same no matter how much you zoom in. But what if we turn this off? So let me turn this off. So right now I'm at 100% zoom. And if I do a brush stroke, it looks like this. Then if I zoom in again, it looks like this. If I zoom in again, it looks like this. Now that I've zoomed out, you can see those 3 strokes are getting progressively smaller. I'll explain how this works soon, but first I want to explain why someone would want to use this in practice. So I'm going to hide this layer, and I'm going to just give myself a gray background and bring my line art into focus here. I'm just going to fill in some of this to make it black, just so it looks a bit nicer. Okay, cool. So here I have my line work. I'm at 100% zoom and I'm on a 2% brush size. So if I draw that, my brush looks like this. I've also got dynamic brush scaling on. So let's say I've been detailing this section here. You know, there's a lot of nice small patterns and things like that. And if I want to go to even more detail, let's say between these lines, I need to like really zoom in. But the thing is, my brush is still really chunky, like it's the same size and it hasn't changed. So I'd need to rescale this brush down even further to maybe 1% before I can really get these tiny little details here. Let's zoom out. So it's an extra step where every time I zoom in, I need to resize the brush to make it smaller and to accommodate for that zoomed in size. But if we turn off dynamic brush scaling, and let me just set my brush back to 2%, I'm drawing like this, and then I go and zoom in and do my drawing. It's maintained its scale relative to the screen size, and now it's a little bit thinner. So I just zoom in and now my brush has scaled itself relative to the screen size. It's a much more intuitive way to work, especially if you're doing complicated or detailed line work. But the confusing part here is if I go and look to my brush size slider, the size hasn't changed. So what's going on? Okay, this is going to be a mind explosion, so just take a moment, grab a coffee, because we're going to go deep. Before we go further, we need to understand how brush sizing works in Procreate. So first we have the thing that everyone is familiar with, which is the brush size slider, and it runs from 1% all the way up to 100%. But there's actually a more powerful set of properties above this that exist within each individual brush's settings. So if I go to my brush, I'm going to go and choose the airbrushing. I'm going to choose the hard brush just as an example. And you can see here under properties, you've got this thing called brush behavior, maximum size and minimum size. These properties actually define the range of our brush size slider that I showed you just before. So if I set this to 100%, when I do 100% and 0% on the brush size slider, that's actually what it is. So just to show you, if I go and set this at 100%, that's what I get. And if I go and set this at 1, I'll get something like that. Now, if I go back into my hard brush properties and I set it to, let's say 200%, then go back to my canvas and set the brush size to 100%, I'm actually going to get double the size of what was originally on 100%. So if I do that, you can see that dot is about double the size of that original dot. Similarly, if I go back into my hard brush and I set this instead to 50%, it now means that when I use this brush set at 100% in the brush size slider, I'll see a 50% size, or it'll be half of this original dot, which yeah, makes sense. Just to make this easy, I'm going to draw this up here. So let me create a new layer. I'm going to dump that in there, and I'm just going to use this as my kind of noteboard or whiteboard. Okay, so we have our min-max properties that I just showed you, our brush size slider, which is this one, and then we've got our screen or our iPad, then we've got our canvas, and then we have the brush itself, or the mark that the brush makes. And just now I showed you the relationship between this and this. So the min-max settings here constrain what 0 to 100% looks like as set by the brush size slider. So when max is set to 100%, 100% on the slider is actually 100% of the brush size. Then if the max size is set to 50%, if we set 100% to the brush size, it looks like 50%. And if we were to draw this on here, that would then be like maybe like half the size of that original dot. So I just want you to get that relationship. Whatever is set in the individual brush properties ultimately constrains this brush size slider here. Now you might be thinking, okay, that makes sense, but these are a lot of percentages, and at the end of the day, we ultimately need to know a pixel size of our brush. Otherwise, everything is relative and we just can't get a grasp of how big things should be. Well, thanks to a forum post I found, it turns out that when a plain brush with no other modifiers is set to a max value of 100% and the brush size slider is set to 100%, you end up with a 256 px brush. And if we continue that logic down, if we set it to 50% with the brush size slider set at 100%, we get a 128 pixel brush. And just to confirm this, let's go out to the gallery. I'm going to create a new canvas. Let's make it 256 by 256. And I've actually created a new brush here. And what I did was I made sure the shape source was like completely filling the entire stamp, so it's flush to the edges. Now let's go to properties. It's set to maximum size 100%. Now we've got the brush size slider at 100%. And if I tap this dot here, it should fill the entire space. And boom. So that's 256 px wide. That's kind of like our rock solid foundation, so we can understand how big a brush is. Okay, so now that you know how the brush system works and you have a definitive pixel brush size, let's jump back to our core issue. So just how is dynamic brush scaling calculated exactly? So in my last tips video, I wrongly claimed that the brush is being calculated as a percentage of the visible canvas area. So I assumed that if I set my brush to, say, for example, 10%, and I made a stroke, or imagine if this was my canvas area and I made a stroke, it would only represent 10% of the visible canvas. And then if I zoom in again, my strokes would be 10% of, again, the now zoomed in visible canvas. And as we zoom closer and closer, that visible canvas will become less and less, which seems to make sense in explaining our original multi-stroke example here, where these strokes were getting smaller and smaller. But two users rightly pointed out that this doesn't make sense. If the brush was relative to the canvas size, wouldn't 100% mean the brush is 100% of the visible canvas? So for example, if I do that, that should be 100% of the canvas, right? But it's not. So I was pretty stumped on this and it took me a while to figure out, but let's go back to our original diagram. So there were two mistakes. The first mistake was claiming that we're scaling relative to the canvas, but we're not. We're actually scaling relative to the screen. And the screen is defined by your iPad size. So I have a 12.9 inch iPad Pro from 2021, and the pixel dimension width of this iPad is 1377 pixels. And the second mistake I was making, and this is the big one, was assuming that the value here in the brush size slider was determining the ratio to screen size. So I was assuming, oh, if I set my brush to 100%, it means I'm using that in my equation to figure out the relativity to the canvas or the screen. Just remember that it's wrong to make this connection between 100% of the brush size slider directly to the canvas. And here's how it really works. So let me bring up this layer and imagine we still have our min-max, we have our size slider, and instead of making that jump directly from this 100% to here, we actually have a new value which I discussed before, which is that 256 pixels or 128 or whatever pixel value you get depending on the configuration here. You've got a new value here. And once you have that value, it gets input into an equation with your screen size. So in this case, we would have 256 divided by 1377, and just to make it a percentage, we would times that by 100, and that gives us roughly 18.59%. And just to clarify, if we do 1377 divided by 256, we get 5.378. So to summarize, when our brush max property is set to 100%, the brush size slider is set to 100%, we're given a result of 256 pixels. And that 256 pixels is 18.59% of my entire screen size. So if it's 18.59% of my entire screen size, it means it would fit into my screen about 5.37 times. Okay, I hope you're still with me. If not, rewind it and watch it back. But just to demonstrate this in practice, let me go and create a new canvas. I'm going to make it 1377 by 1024. Create. I'm going to make sure my brush, yep, max size, minimum size is correct. Now I'm going to set this to 100%. And right now I'm at the default zoom. So it doesn't matter whether dynamic brush scaling is on or off yet, because that factor only comes into effect when I zoom. So let's just start out like this. I'm going to create a new layer on top. Oh, I've got a new one already. And let's put the dot down. It should be 18 point something percent of my screen size, which is the exact same size as my canvas. Boom. And I mean, that is 18% of this canvas size, but just to confirm that, we should be able to fit 5.37 of these across the width of the canvas or the screen. So what I'm going to do is, I've actually got snapping turned on. So, you know, when you go up here to your move tool, you can actually turn on snapping, and I've got magnetics and snapping on just so we're super clean and precise with this. You can see my layer here. Now let me copy paste this in the most efficient way possible. Duplicate, we're going to duplicate one more, and then one more, and that should give us 6. Okay, cool. Let's move this one across. And what do you know? There's 5, and we move our last one. That looks like about 0.37%. If, like, for example, if that's 50% of the circle where those two blue dots are, yeah, that's about 37% of that circle. So it's perfectly correct. And in case you're kind of lost at this point, just remember the purpose of dynamic brush scaling is to maintain the percentage ratio between your brush stroke and this screen. So right now when I do a brush stroke, that's about 18% of the entire screen. You just get a feeling for that proportional ratio between the brush stroke and the screen. And now let's zoom in again, and you're going to get that exact same feeling. See, it feels like you're doing the exact same thing no matter your zoom level. That still feels like that 18%, right? But now again, like I showed you right at the beginning, when I zoom out, they're all different sizes relative to the actual canvas size. Just to recap, there's 3 key points here. First, dynamic brush scaling is relative to your screen and not your canvas. 2, that relativity isn't calculated based on the brush size slider's percentage value. It's based on the calculation between the min-max and the brush size slider, which gives us a pixel value. and then that pixel value is calculated as a percentage of your screen real estate, and that depends on your iPad size. Oh my gosh. Okay, that was a complete brain explosion. If you got value from this video, please consider becoming a patron of the channel. I'm really passionate about sharing what I learn as an artist, digging deep and making complex topics simple to grasp. So if you think that's something worthy of supporting, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/JWalkerPictures. All right, that's it from me. See you guys in the next video. Bye.